All right, excellent. Hello, good morning to me, good evening to, I'm assuming, most of you. Today I'm going to talk about building conversational assistants. I'm moving my mic slightly closer to me so I sound a little bit better. And the Rasa approach, which is a little bit different from sort of existing approaches. So the general approach to NLP and machine learning generally since I'd say the 70s has changed dramatically. So originally, particularly in NLP for things like chatbots or virtual assistants, the original approach was that humans would look at the data, they would understand what was going on, and then they would hand build rules to handle conversations. So a really good example of a system like this is Eliza, which you may have heard about, which was an early chatbot, and you'd say something to Eliza, and then Eliza would take that and rephrase it as a question, and then you'd answer that question and she'd reply back with a question version of what you just said. So it sort of mimicked psychotherapy and very successful initial chatbot. And since then, there's been a really dramatic shift in the way that we do machine learning and NLP, which I think is, again, probably not news to most of you, but good to go over. So the current approach is that machine learning algorithms train models based on a specific architecture and a particular data set that's been curated for a particular, what's the word I'm looking for? Application. There we go. A little sip of coffee. So this has been the very general change in overall the machine learning and NLP fields. And in virtual assistants and conversational AI in particular, this is sort of mirrored in how we handle conversations. So the traditional way of doing conversational AI and how you have a virtual assistant that has a conversation is that you build rules for it. So you would basically graph out what you think all of the conversations that somebody might want to have with your assistant would look like, and then what they'd need to do at each stage, and then you'd recognize what they do at every stage, and then the stage to go on to for that. And this works. I don't want to poo-poo this as a way to design a system. It works perfectly well, but it's a little bit inflexible. There are some drawbacks. So the big thing is that you have to know what your conversations are going to look like ahead of time. And depending on your specific application, that may or may not be feasible. The other big problem with systems like these is that they're pretty slow and costly to update. So if we say want to add, a couple of steps between this initial state and this mortgage search, or we want to make like a branching tree of options outside of the mortgage search, there's going to be a lot of additional work to do. So the Rasa approach to conversations and how conversations happen and handling that in NLP is a little bit more fuzzy. So instead of having sort of a deterministic structure that you're walking through or state machine for your conversational assistant, instead at each turn, when it's the assistant's turn to decide what to do, it will look at all of its possible actions and pick the most likely one. So there's a couple of ways that we do this. Probably the most recent one that we've been using a lot is TED, which is a transformer-driven model to do that. And the general approach to development is pretty different. So if you are building an assistant with Rasa, you'll start with a few example conversations and learn from them, usually using some sort of pre-trained model. And then you'll get your assistant in front of test users as soon as possible. So basically, once your assistant is usable at all, you immediately get people to start using it and then get their feedback, annotate their conversations, notice where there are errors, correct those errors, and feed it back into your machine learning model. And also, we really are big proponents of continuous integration and continuous deployment. So once your assistant is deployed, so before your assistant is deployed, and also once it's deployed, you should continue to make your assistant better over time, using version control for your models, using version control for your data, so that your assistant is evolving as the needs of your user are evolving. So it's, again, the state-based machines work. It's just a different process. So the general development process in Rasa, Alan's termed the phrase conversation-driven development. You start by building a working prototype. So you have an assistant that does the basic thing that you needed to do. And from there, you share it with testers, which I already mentioned. So these are people who know that they're testing the assistant. It's not quite there yet. Then on your end, you take the conversations that those testers have had with the assistant and you review them by hand. You do data annotation. You, again, notice where there are errors. And then you also want to make sure that you're testing your assistant with end-to-end conversations. So this is our approach to testing conversational assistants. You have a conversation, you know how you want it to go, you know what you want the assistant to say, and you just make sure that it's doing that. And in addition to testing with conversations, also tracking desired outcomes. So let's say you have an assistant where you're letting people book trains, passage on trains, and you want to make sure that a certain percentage of people who come to book passage on trains actually do end up booking the passage on trains. Because it could be a successful conversation where they ask for help a bunch of times, and then they learn that they don't actually want to use your system to book a ticket, and they go and do something else. So two separate things to look out for. And then fixing any problems that arise, and then going back to reviewing conversations. So making changes to your model, reviewing conversations, continuing to annotate, continuing to test, continuing to track, and improving your system over time. So today we're going to work on building a working prototype, and we'll do this together. And we'll do this using Rasa Open Source, which is the open source library that we have to build assistants, basically. And then the rest of the process we would generally do with something called Rasa X. So Rasa X is not open source, but it is free to use. And it's a tool that helps you do the rest of the process more efficiently. So like we have GitHub integration and really nice user interface tools. So even people who maybe wouldn't be super comfortable doing the rest of the development process can go through and annotate conversations and see what's going on with your assistant. And just a little bit about what's under the hood and what there is in a conversational AI, because we're going to be, messing with these in a little bit. So one important part is natural language understanding, or NLU. And generally, this is taking text input and then converting it into a computer readable format. So traditionally in conversational AI, you would detect intents. So this is a specific thing that a user wants to do. So I might say hello, and my intent is to greet. Or I might say, I want a ticket to Bangalore from Hyderabad, and that my intent would be to buy a train ticket. So identifying intents, and then also identifying entities. So for example, Bangalore, Hyderabad, or train ticket, those are things that are pieces of information I might need to save to use later to make sure that I'm looking up things correctly in the database. This is an area of active development and research at Rasa, and we're actually sort of moving away from intents, and keep an eye on that space. And then there's the dialogue policy. So this is where I mentioned earlier being able to figure out what happens next in the conversation. And there's a couple of policies that we use. So most bots will have a memoization policy. There isn't an R in there. That's not a typo. And when you're constructing your assistant, you will provide it a series of sort of sample conversational flows of ways that you think things could go. And if you are having an interaction with somebody and you say something and then they say something and you say something and they say something, and that whole trunk of interaction has been said in your has been shown before in your example conversations, then they'll just continue following that script, basically. The TED policy is a more flexible transformer-based policy. And this is really helpful because it can handle digressions. So if I'm talking about one thing, let's say I'm trying to book a train ticket and I'm like, oh, and what's the weather going to be like? I guess this is a very general assistant. And then we talk about the weather and they're like, okay, yeah, so I want to go on the 4th is when I want to buy my ticket for. That digression, TED can handle in a much more sort of flexible way than something like a state machine. And also a fallback policy. So this is if you're not entirely sure what your assistant should do next, this is when you would pick that, that particular policy. And usually this is something like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you rephrase? Or I'm not entirely sure I understood. And you might provide buttons for people to pick of the most common things or the things that you think are most likely that they might be trying to do. And also, so you have a way of understanding what the person's saying. You have a way of deciding what to say next. How do you know what words to say back to the person? So you can produce responses using natural language generation, but it's more common, and I would personally recommend instead to provide them pretty much verbatim. So you would write out the things that you want your assistant to say, and that way you know exactly what your assistant will say, and it won't sort of start going off the rails and saying things that maybe you're not entirely comfortable with, which could be potentially an issue with some forms of natural language generation. So those are the important components. And now we will get to live coding. Also, I have a kind of a weirdly formatted link right here. If you're interested in conversational assistants, we're going to be having a free online conference coming up on June 18th called L3AI that will go into a lot more depth. We've got lots of talks. There's going to be a panel discussion that I'm going to be part of that should be really exciting. And we would love to have you there. And I'll share this link again at the end. So let's get to the live coding portion. Oop. And if I set it up correctly, I did. Excellent. So I want to build a pretty simple sample assistant. And basically, I want to recommend resources for people who are interested in getting started in data science, because I get this question all the time. And the right answer isn't going to be the same for everybody. So there are two resources I want to recommend. If somebody wants a book, I want to recommend this Build a Career in Data Science book by Emily Robinson and Jacqueline Knowles. And if they want an online course to learn how to build neural networks, I want to recommend this Fast AI course by Rachael Tatman and Jeremy Howard is the other person that I was looking for there. A little sip of coffee. So I'm going to build an assistant that will ask you if you want to know about a book or an online course, and depending on your answer, will tell you either build a career in data science or Fast AI. Sorry, little sip of coffee. I don't know if you can see me, but I am stopping to take coffee breaks pretty often. So I already have Rasa installed locally, and there is a video tutorial on how to do this on different systems on the Rasa YouTube channel. So this would be right after I'm done with the video tutorial, and I can double check that it is available. And there we go. So I've just asked for help to see all the commands, and it is installed and good to go. So I'm going to start by initializing a new project so I don't have to start from scratch, and I can modify an existing assistant. Yeah, current directory is great. Yes, feel free to go ahead. Excellent. And I do want to train an initial model. So the original assistant that's going to be trained is called MoodBot, and it asks you if you're happy, and if you're not happy, it shows you a picture of a baby tiger. So we're going to be using that assistant to basically change everything about it and make it do the thing that I want it to do instead. And I'll say we're going to do the recommendation in sort of a I don't want to say a dumb way, but a way that probably wouldn't work if I had a really large number of resources to recommend. So once you get to the point where you have, say, a database you want to look things up in, you can use this actions file is the word that I'm looking for. This actions Python script, and you can, using the Rasa SDK, run any Python code that you want when some action happens. And let's talk to MoodBot just real quick. So I'm going to start by saying hi. And I'm going to say that I'm sad And then this link will show you a picture of a baby tiger, and you can just take my word for it. I don't necessarily want to go see the baby tiger right now. All right, so this is the assistant as it stands, and we want to change it so that it does what we want it to do and not what it's doing currently. And we're going to start by going into data. So I mentioned that the NLU is how you convert the text that someone inputs into a computer readable format. So here we have various intents, and these are things that somebody might say. So they might greet the assistant, they might say goodbye to the assistant, they might say yes or no, they might say what their mood is, and then you always want to make sure that you include a way to handle if somebody asks if your assistant is a bot or not, because you want to disclose that your assistant is not a human, because I have different expectations of interacting with a human that an assistant is not going to be able to fulfill. So I don't actually need these intents. I'm going to, these mood intents, I'm going to create a new intent now, and I'm going to call it want. All right, my headphone cord is tangled in my typing hands. Want book. So I'm going to think of things that somebody might say if they want a book rather than an online course. I like books. Reading is, I prefer to read. And I'm not going to be able to come up with all of the ways that somebody might be able to say that they like books here. I'm just going to give it enough information that we can have a very minimum assistant that we can start using with people, and then the people will, you know, do what people do, right? Say things in many different ways, express their needs and desires, and we can adapt our assistant to be more helpful and useful. And let's say one course. So let's say I like courses. I prefer having a teacher. And then maybe someone would just say online course. So these are all the things that we expect somebody to say to our assistant. And if they say something that's not one of these things, or that we're not confident is one of these things, then we'll fall back onto our, fall back onto our fallback policy. So here's all the things we expect them to say. What are the conversations that we expect them to have? So here we have various interactions that we expect people to have with our assistant. And you will notice that none of these are complete conversations top to bottom. So this one, I think, probably could be. So the assistant says, sorry, the user says hi, the assistant says hi, the user says they're happy, the bot's like, good job, I'm glad you're happy. Here, the user says hi, the bot says hi, the user says they're sad, the bot sends them the picture of the tiger and then asks them if that's better. And then if they say yes, then you say, great, good job. And then here, the assistant says, the user says hi, the assistant says hi, the user says they're sad, the assistant tries to show them the picture of the tiger, asks if that helps, the user says no, and then the assistant just says goodbye. And then if somebody says goodbye, the assistant will say goodbye. So if I was following this path, and then, so I said, I greeted, and then I said that my mood was great, and the assistant said, great, good job. And then I said goodbye, the assistant would say goodbye because it knew that if the user says goodbye, it should say goodbye. So they don't all have to be one big story, was my point there. All right, so the big things that I want to change. How is a user going to integrate with this? So I'm going to say that they want a book resource here. So the greeting is going to be the same. And then they're going to say one of the things in the NLU file. So they want a book. And I'm going to change what the greeting is. And I don't need to actually say want book. I can just say, I don't need to say intent want book. I can just say want book. And then the assistant's going to do something that I haven't told it how to do yet, which is recommend book. And I also want the online course resource. All right, so this is going to be the same, except instead of wanting a book, the user is going to want course, _course. Want course, there we go. And instead of recommending a book, we're going to recommend course. And then I don't think I have something that's going to be like the sad path. So the things that you can do with this assistant right now, well, right now you can't do anything. If we try to train it right now, it'll say, hey, I don't know what this recommend course is, and I want to change what the assistant says with utter greet as well. So right now, the things that you can do with the assistant is you'll say hi, the assistant will say, hey, do you prefer books or online courses? And then you'll say books, and then it'll recommend a book. Hi, do you prefer books or courses, online courses? It'll recommend, of course, saying goodbye. And then if you ask if it's a bot, it should say, yes, I am a bot. All right. So the next thing that we'd want to update is the config file, which I'm probably not actually going to change. So this is what tells my assistant what the natural language processing pipeline should be. You can see right now I am in English. So if someone tried to use, say, I don't know, Telugu with this bot, it probably wouldn't work very good. So if I wanted to do anything language specific, I would do it in the config file. Here are the dialogue policies. So the memoization is the one that I mentioned. If it's seen this exact interaction before, it'll continue with it. The TED policy is the transformer-based policy I mentioned that will sort of track the state of the conversation. Etc. So I'm just going to leave those be. I think those should work perfectly well for what we're doing. I don't need any credentials. This would be for if I had, say, a connection to Facebook, or if I was serving my assistant over Slack, or a different platform. And then the domain we do need to update. So first, we're going to need to list all of the intents that our user can have. And if you'll remember, we got rid of mood great and mood unhappy. And instead, we have want book and want course. So we need to update that. And then want. All right. And then we have all of the things that our assistant can say. So here we have the text, hey, how are you, for utter greet. And I want to, instead of how are you, I want to say, hi. Do you prefer books or online courses? So I don't need to change the name of this. It's going to be the same. Just what the assistant says is going to be a little bit different. Utter cheer up and utter did that help we no longer have in our stories. You can see that there's no utter cheer up and utter did that help. So I can just get rid of those entirely. And I believe we also removed all of the utter happies. Let me double check that just to make sure I'm not deleting something that I actually need. Yeah, also this should be utter recommend book. Utter just means to say something. It's a fancy way of saying say, or a thing that you say. Okay, so I think that should be good. So we're going to need utter recommend book and utter recommend course are two things that we're going to need to add. So I'm going to get rid of you. Delete. You on the same line. There we go. And you may notice that changing the assistant is pretty much only editing YAML files. I'd recommend the book. What's the book called? Build a Career in Data Science. And if I was feeling fancy, I could do a link to that as well. But I'm not feeling very fancy this morning. I am feeling I want a little bit more coffee. And I'm just going to put it in single quotes, just in case, All right. And then we need another utterance, which is utter recommend course. Change this to course. I'm almost certainly going to forget to update one thing. Online course. Fast.ai. All right. So I believe those are all of the utterances that our assistant needs. I'm going to go back to my stories and check, and I'll get an error if I accidentally miss one, which I want to do. Greet, recommend book, recommend course, goodbye, I am bot. Greet, recommend book, recommend course, goodbye, I am bot. Awesome. Okay, so that looks like that is good to go. Okay, so right now we've trained a model for the mood bot, the one that asks if you're happy or not. And it is this model here. And it is for a very different bot than the one that we have right now. So I'm going to retrain. I'm going to do that using Rasa train. Now we wait. And if you are wondering, the Rasa bits are almost all TensorFlow at this point. All right, successfully saved. Your Rasa model is trained. Excellent. Let's talk to it. Let's see if it worked. Okay, so Rasa shell. And this allows me to talk to my assistant in the command line. Once I have my assistant up and running and good to go, I'm probably going to want to stop talking to it into the command line and deploy it using Rasa X so that when people talk to it, they can do it in a nice UI instead of, this. Not that this is necessarily bad. All right. It's thinking. There we go. All right, let's say hi. Hi, do you prefer books or online courses? I like books, which I believe is not, oh, okay. I'm trying to find something that's not exactly in the file. What if I say I prefer books? I'd recommend the book, Build a Career in Data Science. Okay, thanks. And I don't think I taught it a way to handle with handle being thanked. I don't think that's an intent that we have. Yeah, it's not an intent that we have. But you can see, even though I didn't say exactly one of the utterances that was I provided as a sample, and also I misspelled prefer here. I think it should be, I think this one is right and this one is wrong, but who can tell? Certainly not me right now. Even though I don't have this exact utterance here in my training data for my assistant, it's still identified that I was asking for a book. It recommended the book. And even though I didn't have a way to handle thinking, it still deduced that that was the end of the conversation. Yeah, so we have an assistant. And just to stop it, I'm going to do /stop. I'm going to do /stop with the slash in the correct direction. There we go. Yeah, so that's all it takes to build a very basic assistant in Rasa Open Source. If I was interested in actually serving it to people, I would publish it or deploy it using Rasa X, and then give people, the information to go and interact with it. So let me see if I can get my slides back up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I'm going to open it up to questions, which I think should come through the chat. And if you are interested in getting in touch, feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter is probably the best way to do that, which is RCTATMAN. And again, if you are interested in conversational assistance, we would love to see you at L3AI. I'm gonna check the chat now. It looks like there might actually be a message there. All right. Oh, there were some questions. Sorry about that. I was not ignoring you. I just straight up did not see them, which I guess is, no, that's different from ignoring, because ignoring is it's there. Can I do the coding parallelly in a browser IDE like Google Colab? I have not tried to install Rasa in Colab. I think the thing that might get funkiest about that is when you initialize a Rasa bot, as you saw, it requires a file structure and it creates a lot of files. And I have not used Collab in a little bit, but I do know that the integration with Drive and like the way that files are stored, the last time I used it was a little bit funky. So you could try it, but I think it would be a little rough. So yeah, let me know if you can get it work. 2, how many stories per path is required? Just 1. And as you get more and more human-generated stories, you can add them in, it'll get better. Our recommendation before you actually deploy your assistant to like customers is that you should have at least 90% of your data not generated by you. So like here, I have 3 examples of this intent of wanting a book. I'd want 30 total examples of people wanting books before I launched it, with the rest of the examples being generated by users. Can we jump between multiple models? Like in the screen, we see 2. I want to use the earlier. How easy is it to change those? I believe you can use the previously trained model. I think you can specify it. Help, please. Load your trained model, let you talk to the assistant on the command line. I believe there is a way to specify which model. Connector, credentials. M. Okay, so if I wanted to talk to my earlier model, which would be this one, I believe 2020-528. Oh, no, sorry, it's going to be in models. What am I thinking? We'll see. This might get a little bit funky because I have dramatically changed what the assistant looks like since that model was trained. Yeah, so if you specify the model, you can just talk to the last model. What languages does Rasa NLU support? Right, that's a great question. So we're built on top of, by default, Spacy. So we support the languages that Spacy supports. Let me just pull up the Spacy languages. And unfortunately, it's just not that many. I want to say Spacy supports maybe a dozen languages. Because we are open source, however, you can, let's zoom in. Yeah, so by default, English, German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Dutch, Greek, Norwegian, and Lithuanian. So I sure hope you are in Europe. So there are some pre-trained models, but you should be able to use a custom pipeline for another language. So for example, Rasa supports the Jieba tokenizer for Chinese. How many training examples do I need for NLU? It depends, like 3 per intent, I think is pretty good to start out with. Again, you want the majority of your data to be from users by the time your bot launches. If you are not using a pre-trained model, so the nice thing about English is that people have done a lot of work on English and poured a lot of money and compute into it. And in my config, I believe Diet has quite a bit of pre-training in it. So you need fewer if you have a pre-trained model that you're using for your NLU. Is it possible to integrate Rasa outcomes from visualization tools, say Tableau? Ooh. It is possible. I have not done it. I've definitely heard of people who were working on it. I don't think I've seen a finished project, but also it hasn't been sort of top of mind for me. But I mean, you can serve your Rasa assistant and save your data pretty much wherever you like. You're not tied down to a specific cloud provider. So if you can access that data through your Tableau instance, then yeah, absolutely. Is Rasa X the only way to deploy a bot made using Rasa? It is not the only way. It's probably the easiest way, especially if you are interested in doing that CI/CD cycle. You can take your assistant. So for example, this assistant, I could serve it using an HTTP endpoint, and you could query that endpoint and get the responses back. So you can definitely do it other ways. Again, I just think Rasa X is probably going to be the easiest. Can we automate intent classification and story building from existing data? Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, so if it's data in another assistant format, yes, because it's already been done, and you can just transfer it over. That's actually something that we're working on, is sort of intent discovery. Well, story discovery, really, because again, we're sort of moving away from intents. You can try different clustering approaches to see if that's a first pass, but I would probably recommend doing it from hand as much as possible, at least for your first pass, because it'll let you really think about what you want your assistant to do and how people will interact with it. Can we save context the same as dialogue flow? I'm not entirely sure what saving context means here. If you mean the context of the conversation, yes, those are stored in the tracker. And I could, if I wanted to, download all of my conversations from the tracker. I think that's what you're asking. Again, I'm not super familiar with a lot of the dialogue flow vocabulary. Do we have specific pre-trained models for healthcare? Oh, actually, that's a great question. So we have... I'm doing some Googling. So we have a new a new developer portal. Actually, this just launched. Look how nice this is. We completely redesigned it to make it a little bit easier to navigate around. And we have some starter kits, and I don't think our healthcare one is up yet, but these are projects that are a little bit more fleshed out. So this one, for example, is an example of a help desk, so like an IT help desk. We also have a financial services one. So I believe that there is a healthcare one on the works. So not right now, unfortunately, but there are existing projects out there from other users that you might be able to find, depending on the license of that project. Sometimes the Rasa model forgets the flows and jumps to some similar kind of intent. What should I do? Oh, interesting. So if that's the intent from the user and it's misidentifying the user intent, you can try adjusting the confidence thresholds. So what that will do is it'll make the fallback policy happen more often. And if your problem is that there's confusion between intents, that might help. You might also you might genuinely have intents that are just very similar, and sort of a more powerful isn't really the word that I'm looking for here. Sort of like a more drastic alternative would be to change the structure of your intents so that they are less similar, but that's obviously not going to work always. Question, can it learn from conversations we are doing? Does it create new stories on the go? Yes, through Rasa X, you can add conversations as stories. Is there a forum where I can look for answers to questions that I might be having? That's a great question. There is, in fact, a forum. The forum is, actually, it's probably linked here. Yeah, forum.rasa.com. Also, we're running a developer survey, which I would be very grateful if you took, because I am using that information in my work. So yeah, this is the best place to ask questions. And we try to stay on top of forum questions as best we can. How could one become a contributor on the Rasa platform? That is another great question. We have actually, Is it linked here? Almost certainly it is, right? Da-da-da. So we do absolutely have a way to become a contributor. And the easiest way is we actually have a GitHub board, project board. Yeah, there we go. So we have a GitHub project board right here. It's github.com/org/rajhq/project/23, which is super easy to remember. I'm going to paste it in the chat so y'all can share it back out. And we have various issues, and they're sorted by priority and sometimes how difficult they are. And if you are interested in getting started, I would say if this is your very first time working on an open source project, check out this board, which has sort of like a little bit more practice problems, so you can sort of get a feel for things. And then as you get more, confident, you can start working on open issues. Also, if you wanted to, say, create a meetup, that's a way to be a Rasa contributor, or add, developer education materials, also a way to become a contributor. So yeah, we would love to have you. It's an open source project. How to develop a COVID-19 chatbot using Rasa. So in general, using the same sort of process that we've been doing. I believe we have an example project. Yeah, so we also have a list of COVID-19 resources specifically. So I think that might be a typo. I think there's only supposed to be one E there. So for example, we have a health alert service from links to a bunch of different things. But the language coverage isn't fantastic. So if you were interested in building one in a new language, that would be really, really fantastic. And I will share this link in the chat as well. On the context lines, can we pass an earlier intent context into the next intent? And what is the context lifetime if yes? Okay, so I think the way that I'm understanding this question, and apologies if I am misunderstanding it, is if you have a piece of information and you sort of want to store it and use it later on in the conversation, that is absolutely doable. And probably the easiest way to do that is with something called slots. So the way that we have, I'm pulling up the documentation here, slots, S-L-O-T-S. So the way that we've set up our assistant so far is really hacky, I'd say. It's not necessarily the best way to continue on with this project, but it is a good first step. To continue on with this project, I'd probably create a new intent called inform that could note entities. And I can actually, if we have a little bit of time, maybe show you how to do that. But slots are a way to store pieces of information across multiple terms and then refer back to them. Yeah, and then question, does it support voice input? We integrate with voice input, but Rasa assumes that by the time you get to Rasa, it is text. So it is not, we don't have built-in voice support. There is a walkthrough, let me pull it up, the blog post real quick. So there is a walkthrough on how to build an assistant with the open source Mozilla tools that Yusta did. And that is on the Rasa blog. Oh, that's the old Sarah design. Sorry, was there something? All right. How can we perform entity extraction, e.g. a city name like Hyderabad or some specific date? Great question. So dates we support using Duckling. And I'm actually going to go back and we are going to improve our assistant. So let's, instead of having two intents here, one book and one course, let's start to use entities and slots instead. So it's going to be, let me pull up the specific page here. So if you I'm going to need to add this to my my domain. So slots are a way of storing information in your, if you want to get that piece of information out in your, you know, your actions.py is the file where you can just run arbitrary Python code. You can use that from the tracker, which is what stores the context of the conversation. And then here's the way that you would set it in a story. So let's add book and course as slots instead. So I'm going to here, instead of the intent being that I want book and the intent being that I want course, I'm going to say want format. And then here I'm going to make this an entity, and I'm going to call the entity sorry, I'm scrolling through the I'm pretty sure it's square brackets, round brackets, but I'm just going to check real quick. Well, it's not in there. I'm pretty sure it's square brackets, round brackets. All right, and then I'm going to move all of these intents up as well to courses. And again, I'm like 80% sure it's square bracket, round bracket, but I always get it backwards. Call this course. And you'll notice that I'm making these intents pretty broad. So, or sorry, these entities pretty broad. So a course and a teacher are not the same thing. But if somebody talks about teachers or courses, I will deduce that the way that I should set the slot is using that piece of information. A little bit more coffee. Sorry, I wasn't actually prepared to do this as part of the demo today. Can you tell us how to set up CI/CD for both model and data? I believe that by default, the Rasa X setup will handle model versioning and data versioning. More coffee. Okay, sorry for drinking into the mic. All right. So we have that in the NLU file, and I'm absolutely going to make a mistake here, and then we'll just go back and fix it together, and that is not a problem, right? All right. So we're going to talk about the format that they want, and then I'm just scrolling up and down in the documentation over here. Show me. No, I want to set it in the all right. So want format, and then have I done this in a weird way? Maybe. Okay, so we don't know what the slot name is yet. We only know what the entity name is yet because we need to define the slot in the domain file. All right, so we know that the entity could be book or could be course. We don't know what the slot name is yet. And then that's going to be, this one is for course. So let's do course. All right. And then we're going to change this to that. Okay, so that should be the only change that we make. And then instead of course, it's going to be book. And I think name is an awful name for this slot, so let's call it format instead. Okay, so this is the name of the slot, which we haven't set anywhere else yet, and this is the name of the entity. And we get the entity names from our NLU, and we get the slot names from, we just made them up, not the config, the domain file. And I am going to have to look up how to put them in the domain file because I always make it a little bit wrong. All right. There we go in the domain file. Move you. Move you. All right. So intense responses. I think it goes usually at the bottom before session config. All right. And this does not have slot during conversation, entity, domain contains a slot with the same name. The slot will be set automatically. All right, so let's see. I think I might have done something funky. We'll figure it out. Okay, so the name of the slot should be format. I think we did it, and this is not right. Something is going to be wrong here. Let's just real quickly try retraining and see what error message we get. That's, I think, going to be a good first step for us. Like I said, I hadn't prepared this part of the demo. There we go. And we are almost certainly going to get a error message here, which is great because that's what I'm looking for to tell me what to do next. And I'm just retraining now that I have, I should probably not set it to human. Okay, what did this say? Loading domain from domain.yaml failed using an empty domain. The provided YAML file is invalid. Interesting. But it's still training. It definitely exists. How did I make my YAML file invalid, huh? That's a weird thing. Okay. Interesting. Poodle says there's no more questions. I have a lot. I've got plenty of questions. Okay. Slot set by action. That's not what I'm looking for. Okay. Oh, gotcha. This slot is named name. Confusing. Okay, so let's name it format instead and see if it stops yelling at us. Yeah? No valid domain file was found. Oop, we got an error message up there. Unknown intent. All intents listed in the domain file. Provided YAML file is invalid. Domain.yaml. Domain.yaml using empty domain. What did I do? This is correct, right? And it's not italic, so I've saved it. Mysterious. And it's definitely going to throw more errors because none of the entity format could not be found in the feature map because it didn't read the domain file. Well, that's mysterious. Let's open up one that actually does have slots that work, just as a just so I can show you an example. All right, so this assistant does have slots that work, and I know that, and I need to save that. So this is an assistant that I've been working on for a little bit. Yep. Okay, no, I definitely put the slots in correctly. And what this does is it gives you a quiz, basically, where it asks you a bunch of questions about the different ways that you could say something. And then when you're done with the quiz, it runs a classifier on your answers and says, well, based on the way that you say things, you sound most like someone from, you know, New Orleans or Seattle. And it's only cities in the United States. So here I have slots, and they are filled as someone goes through and answers the quiz. And then I use that information So I collect the information from the slots using a form, which goes through and asks people a bunch of questions that you've predetermined and saves their answers in a particular way. And then once I have saved all of my slots, as you can see, I have quite a few. Once I've saved all of my slots, I actually go through and run this classifier where I take all of the information from the slots and then convert it using a label encoder and then pass it to the classifier, and then I get the classifier information back and I set a new slot dialect to be the dialect of the speaker. So this is one that we've been working on the live coding on the Rasa YouTube channel for a little bit. And that's an example of how it would work. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong on the other end, but probably the answer is not enough coffee. All right. And Prul says there's no more questions. So hopefully I answered your questions about slots. I will say that this assistant is also not quite ready to go to the Rasa X stage. I'm still prototyping because the classifier is wrong. And I did figure out Wednesday why and how it was wrong, and we should be able to go back and fix it. And then we can deploy it using Rasa X and people can actually use it, which should be an exciting moment. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, so I hope that was helpful. Sorry about the weird detour. I'm just not batting 100 today. That's okay. I don't know what the cricket equivalent would be.
Thank you, Rachel, for answering so many questions, so many of them so patiently.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think I'll be sharing the links in the description for people, and they could go and head over to the documentation also and to some examples if they want to get started or they have any problems. Or you could even post the links in the YouTube again, so we could get back to Rachel. Thank you so much, Rachel, I know it's quite early for you, and you're here, and there's such a wonderful session. Thank you so much. And thanks a lot to all the people who took out the time and joined us today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Great questions. Thank you.